Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review T2 Terminator 2 Judgment Day. So, for this film, this movie is currently available on Pluto TV for absolutely free, so check it out there. You'll be able to go on and get your version of Terminator 2, whether it's to have me the paranoia of thinking that I'm watching some weird extended cut where I don't remember half of these scenes in this movie, but they're there, surprisingly. Like, if you're going on and not remembering there being this dream sequence between Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor within this film, then then maybe you're going on and seeing some weird extended cut where you have to just second guess everything that you're watching. But anyways, I make my way into T2, and I have to say that this movie is almost a near perfect film. I am to say that this movie is to be in my top 10 of movies, but also it's to have its flaws. Obviously, we come to find that really, since this is just a sequel film, it needs to do things very similar to the first one, but at a bigger scale. We obviously look at John Connor, and he's the Sarah Connor of this film. We look at Sarah Connor, and she's the Kyle Reese of this film. And we look at Terminator as like, okay, he can't be the bad guy at this point. We've already had that film, so he needs to be the good guy, and there has to be a much more bigger threat looming, which is to be the T-1000, to really expand upon what these Terminators could do. The liquid metal Terminator has to be the most visually interesting villain I have ever seen, ever. A lot of people could go on to disagree with me. A lot of people could throw in stuff like xenomorphs or other kind of very complex aliens and all these other kind of things, and throw in that this T-1000 is not to be anything more than just like this weird silver suited guy and what have you. But when watching this version of the film, I am to really just be like, well, no, I disagree. Like, I think that this T-1000 is the most just visually interesting thing. And while I'm watching this movie, I'm like, man, we come to find that the T-1000 is to eventually kind of blend into its surroundings towards the third act. And I'm just like, all right, like, this is so visually interesting what they're doing here. But so, T2 is to really just love chase scenes. And if I'm to go on and look at the big massive truck scene from the first film, man, did they really double down on that. But yeah, like, it's very obvious that they need to just eat up time in this film, as well as also the thing that they're additionally adding is like, well, hey, if by this time the Terminators are coming after specifically Sarah Connor or John Connor to try to eliminate them off the map, why not finally have the Connors try to eliminate Skynet off the map so early and be this chess move of a movie that eventually brings in Dyson and has him go on and find out that he is to put things in place that is destroying the future. And he then in turn decides, well, okay, let's go on into my laboratory, destroy everything that we know of the Terminators, as well as anything that could start off Skynet. But they find out that with the future not exactly being set, that Judgment Day is also inevitable. That it'll happen anyways. We'll just go on and replace some things. We'll go on and we'll eventually realize that people can't unsee things, and that will go on to lead them to creating Judgment Day within sequels. Like, when we look at Terminator 3, we obviously are to come to find that out. But also, when even looking at Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, we come to find how, like, there are to go on and be staples of the Terminator movies that we find from this film. Like, whenever a Terminator is to fight another Terminator, they have to go on and kind of do this, like, weird, like, hugging dance of a thing where they go on and they jostle one another through these walls. Or in the third film, there's, like, bathroom stalls. They're fighting through a bathroom. And, like, it's very similar to one another. Like, I don't know why it is that we have to kind of recreate that pattern every single time of that weird dance of a thing, but it always occurs. We'd also have to have, like, these massive truck chase scenes that, again, end up getting put through every film. Like, in the third film, we would have a uh, a pet truck and this massive crane like truck that looks like almost like a fire truck for how massive it is, that is going on and chasing off against the Terminator. Uh, oh, and there's also a fire truck that is to also occur within that film. But we'll get to that when eventually we get into Rise of Machines, because eventually I'm sure at some point I probably should cover that, because if anything, otherwise we should just be talking to the hand. Also, 4T2, with this weird cut that I'm going on and seeing, it's very interesting how the Terminator is trying to smile in this film in a very weird and creepy-ish, but that also kind of ruins Terminator movies down the road where he's to be smiling and it's to be the joking thing, whereas in Terminator 2, it's just this, like, well, yeah, he's the hero now, so he has to go on and figure out how to smile and try to be like everyone else. Like, they're pulling him apart and they're trying to figure out how to make him a better machine because he's getting a limited way of being able to learn and adapt. Also, I think the biggest hole of this film is actually that the Terminator wants to try and terminate itself by the end of the film. We obviously have to realize that this Terminator needs to protect John Connor up until the point to where Judgment Day is to clearly no longer be a thing. Or really just have this Terminator there to find that Judgment Day is no longer to be a possibility. Anyways, I kind of said the same thing there. So, but instead, we have the Terminator that decides to self-terminate and lures itself into the steel mill and calls it a day. Realizing that anyways, we're going to get a resetting in Terminator 3 that gives us a whole another Terminator, which looks very similar to the ones of the first and second. Because in the third one, we have the Terminator that goes on to say to John Connor, it's like, well, yeah, like, you at this point just have a real affection for my model number, so you keep sending me back, and like, it would have been quite interesting to see how they really would have gone on and be able to update Arnold's Terminator from movie to movie, but it seems like they just kept going back to the original Terminator and just keep finding models. Just like, man, they could have gone on and gotten like how cell phones, like, we have to go on and we have to get the bigger and better model every year. No, uh, for John Connor and the Resistance, they just keep going back to the same old Terminator, to where they don't get a newer model every year. They just go with the same classic look that obviously has to go up against threats that is no way of match against them anymore. But I guess if you kind of look at it, the Terminator is to really, after the T-1000, not have anywhere of more complex threats against it. So, like, if anything, if they were to not just go on and create the same solution every single movie to figure out how to beat that same villain Terminator, then I would not be surprised if they just rinsed and repeated. Just, oh yeah, just go on and just uh, throw another one into the steel mill and call it a day. Also, we find that there is a liquid metal Terminator within one of the later movies, which of course was Genesis, and they were to go on and defeat it by using acid, which I find to be rather interesting. Of a different way to take that threat out of liquid metal. So, with that said, before I get way too lost in the weeds here and I start to go on and ramble a little bit more, I think it's about that time to just say that it's about that time to go into spoilers and break down to this whole entire film, because if anything, that's a way more challenging and more difficult process than anything else. So, let's get into the Tia portion, and then we'll get on to the full on breakdown and details. So, we come to find that in this movie that John Connor, since he is to now be born in the world, the Terminators are to have a mission in taking him out. So, because they can't do it in the future, because John Connor is beating them, so they have to try and do it in the past. So, the Terminators all arrive, as there are now two of them instead of one to protect John and one to come after and kill him. So, as these Terminators arrive in their own special ways, and we have the T-1000 that goes on to find a cop car after an electrical disturbance and takes over the cop car, and is to try to figure out the address of John Connor to then find out where he lives and then try to find where he is. We have John Connor that is to have parents that he goes on to tell them they're not really his parents, and John goes on to find this credit card where he can go on and steal money, and he had learned this whole tactic from his mother. And so John Connor goes on to make his way to the Galleria after John goes on and tells Tim about Sarah Connor and kind of the update that we are to go on and need about where she is now, where Sarah had gone on to get busted and then eventually ended up being a psycho in this mental hospital. And John was to believe that Sarah was just giving him crazy talk. But then when John is to finally be thrusted into the middle of a fight between the Terminator and the T-1000, John then finally goes on to realize that his mother was telling him the truth and starts to go on and touch the Terminator and starts to realize that he's bleeding and being like, oh my god, like, so you're a Terminator. So, as we'd go on in this film to when John is first seen and then battling through the mall, and then they go through through the canal where there's this race going on of who is going to get John first. And then we obviously have to go on and realize that it's going to be the hero. So John goes on and takes the Terminator and tries to figure out if he should be calling home, does call home, and tries to warn them. But if anything, we come to find out that it's far too late. That a dog named Max is actually to be pretended to be Wolfie to see what the answer is. And then weirdly, the T-1000 goes on to kill the dog to look at the dog tag that says Max. Like, all right, well, they figured something out there. So John is with the Terminator, and as there seems to be some miscommunication between both John and Terminator, all of a sudden John is to cry out for help, and all of a sudden these jocks arrive, and the Terminator goes on and starts to tear into them, and John is like, wait a minute, like, you're going on and you're trying to kill these people. And obviously the Terminator is like, well, that's what my name is, like, I am to kill people. And so now John is to try to much more soften the Terminator up to realize that he should swear to not kill people. And we then would have the Terminator that goes on and shoots people in the legs and says that they live. And John is to make the idea up that he needs to go on and save his mother, and forces the Terminator into following with him. So John decides with the Terminator to make their way to the mental hospital to try and retrieve Sarah Connor, as Sarah Connor, it seems, is to have no way out of this mental hospital. Because when even Sarah Connor is to try to trick people into pretending that she doesn't believe that the Terminators are real or that this future is ever going to inevitably happen, we'd have guys like Silverman, that was to have been on the last movie, that was to go on and just be like, well, you know what, Sarah, I know you a lot better. You're just going on and you're just telling me what I want to hear. And if anything, I'm just going to keep you stuck here for another 6 months until you learn your lesson. You have your own weird, goofy timeout. So Sarah goes on to realize that she's never getting out of here, and all she wants to do is just to see her son, because he's naked out there without me. He's naked. Kind of like how all the Terminators make their way to this past being all naked. But anyways, so Sarah eventually is to realize how she's never getting out of this hospital. So she has to force her way through escaping by going on to take this paper clip and eventually try and figure out a way to open these doors, find this orderly named Douglas and knock him out, and then just start making Sarah's way through the mental hospital with this baton. At some point, Sarah will go on and get this needle that she thrusts into the neck of Silverman, and then eventually here's where the Terminators start to come in. As Sarah scrambles through the mental hospital, she eventually makes her way to this elevator where she's met by the Terminator. Sarah freaks out, eventually starts to back further and further away, and then all of a sudden John comes running in to explain to his mother that, if anything, this Terminator is not a threat, that it's sent to protect him. And the Terminator goes on and hands Sarah his hand to say, come with me if you want to live, which of course would be the quote that Kyle was to give Sarah in the first movie. Again, it's always quite interesting how things kind of tend to loop around in this film with all the quotes and such. So as well as also the whole like the extension of like uh fate is what we make for ourselves and the future is not set and all these other kind of things. So after Sarah, John, and the Terminator escape from the mental hospital after dealing with the T-1000 for the first time and all of its full abilities with it creating these metal arms and being split in half and also having this liquid metal thing just walk past this cell uh, door without any problems. Well, maybe a little bit of problems because he locks his gun within the cell and has to figure out a way to get it out. The cell door. So Sarah goes on to escape and then finds after John is to give her hundreds of dollars, Sarah needs to go on and make her way back to Enrique to basically strip away everything from him, even his tooth fillings, and try to get clothes and weapons and a truck and every possible thing that they're going to be able to use to go up against the T-1000 Terminator, but also to try to wipe out Skynet. So Sarah eventually, when meeting the Terminator, wants to know his story, and then further, Sarah wants to know more in detail the person who was to have created Skynet. And then as Sarah gets more and more nightmares about nuclear bombs going off, because it seems oddly that Sarah is in a future that she is to have not have existed in, but for some odd reason she knows what exactly is going to be taking place, as if she's lived it, and she's going through this nightmare over and over and over again, even though she is to not actually to have been from the future and knows what is to have happened. But if anything, I guess it's just the trauma of knowing the truth, the burden that the body takes of knowing how your future is possibly going to end, and the countdown that really just becomes. But so Sarah goes on to run off to Dyson, and here's where Connor's like, she's gonna blow him away. Yeah, so off to the races they go, both Terminator and John, to try to save Sarah from not killing Dyson, because vacuums weren't invented yet. Dyson vacuum, and so, but yeah, so Sarah goes on to make her way to Dyson, and then she starts to realize that like killing doesn't come so easy to her, and even doing something that would seem to be rationally quite right in order to eliminate Skynet, it just seems that Sarah was to be so close, but yet no real cigar there. So, once the Terminator arrives to the Dyson family, he rips off the skin of his arm to then thoroughly explain to Dyson their future and how he has a big impact on it. And when Dyson is to hear all this, Sarah says that Dyson is to take it very well, and Dyson says, yeah, I'm going to be sick. So, once Dyson is to find out about his future also, because a man with a big mechanical arm is to really just be like, yeah, like I could really just believe this now. So Dyson goes along with Sarah and her people to then try and eliminate any remnants of what could be a future Cyberdyne system or Skynet, or also going on and destroying the chips and Terminator arm that they had gone on to find within the first movie and had hidden away from anybody, to also make Sarah Connor then seem crazy when they would go on to say, oh, yeah, like they didn't retrieve any kind of feature tech of any kind in that factory. Like, so obviously you're just a crazy person for going on to say that any of this is to exist when it isn't, because there's no real proof that we can put in front of your face. And so, as Sarah is to go on and find out about the arm and the chip, Sarah's like, I knew it! Like, I knew they would hide this away from me. So, but that's also kind of like a fun thing about future knowledge. Like, couldn't they have gone on and told Sarah about the whole arm and chip thing so she could get rid of it? But I guess that's the whole thing. It's like the people coming from the future only have so much limited amount of information, and also like Sarah being on her own probably wasn't thinking about uh, getting rid of the Terminator. She was just figuring out ways to get away from it. So they go to the laboratory and they go through all of these challenging key code things to eventually get all the things that they need to have already kind of shown quite early in the film about the whole like two guys have to have keys to get into this door to then get to the arm and the chip to eventually gather these things up to then have to realize that all of these huge swarms of SWAT and police are trying to make their way through this laboratory that Connor, Sarah, and John and the Terminator are after going up against. And then to have the face off against the T-1000 because he's making his way back into the scene. Getting this motorcycle, which eventually will become inevitable because he will just jump onto this chopper and chase off against the massive police van truck thing, and then ultimately will go on and get into a car accident, and eventually the T-1000 will get in this cryo truck, and the Terminator getting into this much smaller truck that has this like weird goofy bit of like wood house like thing that's on the back of it. So eventually all this ends with the steel mill. We come to see that the Terminator is to try and freeze the liquid metal Terminator, to then find out that that's just a stopgap, that they need to make their way further into the steel mill to hide away from the T-1000. Eventually leading to then Arnold going on and being hasta la vistas and figuring out a way to use a grenade launcher to take out the Terminator, as there's only so many times that Sarah Connor can go on and blast this thing with a shotgun and try to take this thing out. And we also get some interesting T-1000 stuff where we have the call for John, call for him now. We also have like where the T-1000 goes on and looks at Sarah's like, no, no. And then all of a sudden, here's where the Terminator comes in with the grenade launcher, and then it's like, oh, pow. Yeah. So eventually, this all leads with the T-1000 going on and falling into the steel mill, uh, molten hot lava like thing, and then eventually, shortly thereafter, that the Terminator is to follow, saying that he is to need to figure out a way for someone else to terminate him because he can't self-terminate. Also, it's quite interesting when Sarah Connor is clutching that mechanism that is lowering down the Terminator. Because if you look at the very first Terminator movie and then this one, it looks like the same exact bit of togglery or whatever you want to say. It's the same, like, kind of button thing in the first movie that is also to be put in here to lower down the Terminator, and I find that such to be a interesting way to kind of give real touches to the first film to then this film. And yeah, like there's so many amazing things going on in this film that is trying to recreate the first one but in a much bigger scale, and to try to tell a grander story, even if there's not enough of it, in my opinion. So it's also quite interesting to see like Connor's step parents, and also the killing that happens between them. But also, I think for me, I was to write this movie off as it not being at all a horror film anymore, that there's way too much science fiction, there's way too much action that kind of gets away from it. But I may be wrong about that. Like, when looking at this movie, there are horror elements into this film, but not as profound as in the first movie. Like, you can write off the entire first film as a horror film, but in the sequel film, there's more just like elements of it there, which eventually, once we get into sequels, that further and further just completely goes away, in my opinion, because there's more comedy going into the sequels, there's more uh, of the action that is going on in the sequels, and it further tries to be a lighter movie in some ways. But anyways, yeah, I can still go on and enjoy Terminator, so I hope you will too. And I think it's about that time to go into the nitty gritty breakdown, because I've been speaking about this for 30 minutes and probably just getting a lot of just, yeah, I'm just going over the beats and blow for blow kind of scenes, and also just giving my critique of this film. But yeah, like, I have gone on in the past and talked about this film, and I'm going on and doing it in the future because the future is now set. Because otherwise, I'm gonna hope that I don't have to go on and talk about this again in some other channel somewhere. Um, but if anything, hopefully this is the final Judgment Day of this film. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to go into the nitty gritty spoilers of this all and go in more in depth. So, with that said, I think it's about that time again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time is about that time again to spoil this movie. Let me know in the comments below what is be your favorite Terminator film, or if you even did like the Terminator animated show, because I have gone on to find out that will be an existing thing, and I'm kind of curious about it, because I've seen every iteration of Terminator. I've gone on to also see the show Terminator, and I've watched quite a bit of that. So I would be fascinated to see what an anime would bring to Terminator and how drastically different that is, because I'm just very curious about it. And at some point, if people want me to cover more Terminator, I'd be happy to do so. Specifically knowing how this movie may go on and be like the biggest Terminator film out of all of them, but also some of the other Terminator movies do decent enough, I guess. But regardless, like I'm just saying that like I'm not doing this movie because I know how big it is. I'm doing this movie because I thought it would be fun. I think a lot of times when people are doing projects on YouTube, they probably think of it as some like tactical like thing. And I think I was to probably at some point get lost in that too. Where like I even was to look at it as like, oh yeah, this is a big name. I might as well slap it on here. Um, but now I really am kind of letting that all to the wayside. Um, and I'm wanting to do more projects just for fun. And I hope that you guys will go on with me on that adventure, or already have, and have more fun. Because yeah, like I think for a good long while, I kind of like I lost sight of things. Um, I think kind of going on and having way too much pressure to try to really do things that I think the pressure of going on and trying to need to have to like do so many things really got to me. And so that's why now um now that like there's less on my plate of like, okay, all I need to do is just do this one simple thing of just getting people's views. It is to really go on and be like, okay, like now like I can kind of relax a lot more. I can get to a point of just enjoying this more and finding all these fun movies that I can either recount or find some new stuff finally that I'm really just trying to push because I'm just like, man, I never got to this before. Like, let's see what happens with this one. Let's roll the dice this day. And so, anyways, let's roll the dice and go on and talk about every beat for beat, blow for blow of this film. So, spoilers, everybody, because it is about that time if I haven't done it already. Spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about the time we spoil this movie. So, we go into the very beginning of it, and you know how every single movie at a certain time period always has to start out with just these random shots of this city? uh, in some ways, like, that is very annoying, but also, the beginning of this movie is to actually, with the shots that it uses, is to actually make sense. Like, the first thing that they show is just this huge traffic jam of just all these cars all over the road. And then they show a playground, and I'm like, okay, that makes perfect sense to show because the whole playground of things is to be a thing that'll fit into Sarah Connor's dream sequence where she continues to see kids on the playground and eventually the nuke happens shortly thereafter. If anything, I think they should have just led with the whole playground scene, and that could have just been the way to start the film. But, anyways, we then cut to Los Angeles, 2029 AD, and we come to find the hunter killer infantry that is making its way to hunt down some resistance members. We also see the hunter killer tank, and then eventually we'll start to get some more hunter killer aerials coming in. So, as the resistance tries to shoot down a number of hunter killers, and we also have this big truck that comes in with its big huge gun mounted onto the back of it, where eventually a hunter killer aerial is to go on and take that out. We'd go on to see some hunter killer infantry and also some resistance members that are starting to take out some Terminators as they fall. So there is to be a back and forth war going on here. And then we cut to some soldiers making their way to John Connor, and Sarah is to go on to then explain to us that the mission of the Terminators is to realize that John Connor is now a threat, and they have to figure out at all costs how to eliminate him. And so, and here is where we cut to John Connor, who is looking around with these binoculars with the scar on his face, which eventually we'll come to find has to be recreated in other movies and figure out how that happened. Like, Salvation eventually goes on to explain how John Connor had gotten that scar on his face, and then also we'll come to find that even in video games they try to recreate how John Connor is to be looking through other different versions of him, because they do have the whole Terminator video game series also. That there was one really good Terminator video game, but all the rest was either kind of like the NES ones, and they were kind of fun. But a lot of the Terminator movies were, or Terminator video games, I mean, most of them were pretty garbage. But they were really fun though. I like the one where you can go on and play the Terminator as the bad guy, but then eventually you'll go on and become the hero. So that's kind of cool. So now we cut to the past, and we have this random truck stop with this truck, or this semi truck leaving, and all of a sudden we have this electrical issue that is going on. Like, all of a sudden this electricity is just coming out of nowhere. Then all of a sudden we have the Terminator that appears and takes a good huge chunk out of everything that's to be around it, which was a really cool visual there. So the Terminator all going on and being in the nude, it's quite interesting how in the first movie that the Terminator was to so easily find these punk kids and be like, I want your clothes, your boots. and that exchange happened so easily. In this movie, we have to realize that it's going to be a little bit more challenging for the Terminator to go on and get, again, your clothes, your boots, your motorcycle. So as the Terminator makes his way into a place called the Corral, and as he walks through it naked, come to find out also, Arnold was to, for this movie, realize that he needed to go on and he really needed to try to recreate the body type of the first movie. But I think in the first movie, Arnold is way bigger in the first film than in the second. Like, I really feel in the second film that Arnold has severely much more slimmed down. And it's very obvious here. Like, in the first one, he's a massive hunk of a man. In a sequel film, like, he is much more slimmed down to try to be, yes, still much bigger compared to the T-1000, but also, like, to have us much more so understand that he's to kind of be the good guy in this film. But anyways, so as the Terminator goes on and makes his way through this corral, and there's a number of women that are all to be kind of stopped dead in their tracks, like, all right. There is no, like, hey, no shoots, no shirts, no service kind of thing, or trying to boot this guy out. Because I guess, like, if you think about it, like, they do have, like, nudists in this world, but also probably during this time period, that doesn't quite match up to where these guys wouldn't be kicking a guy like this out if he's coming in there flopping his dick all over the place. But so As the Terminator starts to scan around to try to match clothing up with people of his body type, the Terminator goes on to make its way to the cigarette biker, going on to ask him for his clothes, his shoes, and his motorcycle. And the cigar biker goes on and says, "Well, hey, you didn't say please." And the cigar biker goes on and puts the cigarette into the guy's chest, and Arnold, or the Terminator, does not react at all. It's like, huh, that's strange. So the Terminator goes on and breaks the arm and holds the biker down, to then have the biker screaming for his allies next to him to, hey, like, frickin' help me here. So comes flying in a a pool cue to the back of Arnold, or to the back of the Terminator. And so the Terminator goes on and takes the guy who had gone on to hit them with the pool cue, and thrusts him out this window. Then the Terminator goes on and takes the cigarette biker, hucks him on top of this stove where he's going on and dancing off of it, because of course this stove is to, of course, be cooking things. So the Terminator fights off against another biker and stabs him into the back, and has him just stuck into the pool table, to where the guy is asking for anyone to pull the knife out. And now at this point, with this guy being so intimidating to everyone else, there's the one last guy who starts to get this pool cue out, but realizes, no, I'm definitely not going to be the one that beats this guy. So he runs off. So the Terminator makes its way back to the cigarette biker for him to go on and take his keys, throw it at the Terminator, and says, "Take it." So the Terminator makes his way out of the corral fully clothed, and makes his way onto the bike. There seems to be a guy by the name of Lloyd. I don't know why they randomly gave this guy a name. But so Lloyd is to give the Terminator its shotgun, as Lloyd goes on to inevitably cock this shotgun and explain to the Terminator, hey, I'm not going to allow you to take this guy's bike. And the Terminator gets back up from off the bike, gets close to Lloyd, rips the shotgun away from him, and then sees that he has a pair of sunglasses, goes on to take said sunglasses and puts them on. At this point, I am kind of curious of why the Terminator needs sunglasses. If you think about it, the Terminator probably has really amazing vision. Like, in the first film, it did make sense for how the Terminator had to just pull away its eye and show its mechanical eye, and then need the sunglasses for that. That made sense. In the sequels that follow, I guess it's just a cosmetic choice that I have to always go on and just question why that always happens. I guess it just looking just more visually interesting, with this Terminator always wearing sunglasses in the future. But anyways, so we now cut to this random police officer that is to have made his way into calling out of this radio this electrical disturbance. And as the cop continues to investigate, he finds this huge hole in this fence, and then all of a sudden it's to be punched in the gut, knocked down, and then we see the T-1000 that is naked in front of him, going on and trying to take his pistol. And then shortly thereafter, we come to find that the T-1000 gets into the cop car and looks at the address of John Connor. which he looks up on a mobile data computer. I believe it's what that's called. So it's also quite interesting. Like, why is it even that the T-1000 needs clothes anyways? Can't the T-1000 just go on and look at a person and just change its shape to look like those clothes? I don't know. If anything, I guess like that's the whole kind of issue that people could probably have with this movie, if anything. Why is the T-1000 immediately naked? I don't know. So now we make our way into John Connor's household. So John Connor's mother, Janelle, is to be storming up to John Connor, frustrated by the fact that John Connor hasn't cleaned his room in a month, and is hoping that finally Janelle will go on to be able to reason with Connor to try to get him to do his chores. John, obviously going on and completely ignoring Janelle, is blaring his motorcycle, hoping that Janelle will get the point that he just does not care. So Janelle is going on into the house to eventually talk to Tom, her husband, to hope that Tom will then be more convincing to John to finally clean up his room. And eventually, as Todd is to hear Janelle out and be like, well, yeah, I guess, like, fine, I'll go on and I'll convince him to go on and do this. So Todd goes out there and he's to try to get to John right before he leaves off of his motorcycle, because both John and Tim want to go on and want to go and either do some shopping or just want to go to the Galleria. So Todd goes on to explain to John, it's like, okay, John, yeah, like, your mother wants you to go on and clean your room, so hey, like, come in, clean your room. Also, like, I guess, like, these parents don't even care that John has his friend with him. Like, it doesn't remember. No, it's just clean your room. So, because I know if it were me, like, I would not want to go on and with my friends just be like, hey, let's go in my room and let's clean my room. Like, have you watch me clean my room? No. So John turns to Todd and explains that, of course, Janelle is not really his mother, so he doesn't have to listen to her. So now we cut to the state hospital and we see Sarah Connor. Sarah Connor is going on and doing these chin ups because she has figured out a way to adjust her bed to where she is to be grabbing on to the leg part of the bed and hoisting herself up. Dr. Silverman, who we've gone on to, of course, know very well from the first film, is to now be a part of this mental hospital and is bringing in a number of doctors to eventually talk to them about certain patients. And the one he wants to focus on is Sarah Connor. Going on to explain about how she has a schizoaffective disorder and how she is to talk about the future, and a lot of the other doctors are like, oh, well, that's a new kind of story going on. So as Dr. Silverman makes his way to the door of Sarah Connor and explains the whole backstory of Sarah Connor and what had happened to her in the first film, eventually, as he goes on and finally makes his way to the door of Sarah, Sarah goes on to ask Dr. Silverman was like, "Hey, how's the knee?" and Silverman has to say, "Oh yeah, it's quite fine." And then Silverman has to go and explain how he was attacked by Sarah and had hurt his knee. So as Silverman tries to push the doctors away from Sarah's room, Silverman then turns to the orderlies, one of them being a guy named Douglas, and I'm not quite sure who the other guy's name is. So Silverman turns to Douglas and is to explain that he doesn't like how Sarah is to kind of be up and awake while they're going on doing these rounds. So if anything, drug her and knock her out. So Douglas and the other orderly make their way into the room, and Sarah is kind of just like kind of backing away, knowing that she will probably get hurt no matter how much she complies to these guys. So Douglas is to go on and tell Sarah that she needs to take her medication, and Sarah doesn't really want to. So they end up having to thrust her down to the ground. They end up also needing to tase her, but she wasn't showing any real aggression. She just simply um, was to go on and just be like, well, hey, I just don't want to take medication. Like, I just don't want to get drugged up. So they thrust her to the ground, they tase her, and then they force the medication into her mouth, whether she wants it to or not. And then we leave to then have the T-1000 driving up onto Janelle and Todd's house to go on and ask if these people are the legal guardians of John Connor, and if anything, if they have a picture of him, and if they know where he's going. Todd and Janelle are to go on and also say, it's like, well, hey, this is kind of strange that you're coming here to ask me these questions. Because if anything, we've also had a big guy on a bike that is to also go on and ask the same thing recently. And they ask if they should be any worry about him. And the T-1000 says, oh no, like, if anything, you shouldn't be worried about him at all. So now we cut to Connor, who is via an ATM where he's tricking the ATM via this credit card that he has this kind of weird device connected to figure out a way to use an ATM to get this PIN number so he can go on and be able to get this money and get a couple $100. So Connor goes on to explain to Tim about how his mother had taught him how to be able to do this. And also, Tim is to discover from Connor a picture of his mother and starts to ask about, like, oh yeah, like, she looks really pretty. And Connor is like, well, yeah, she's a psycho. And goes on to say how she blew up a computer factory and she ended up getting shot and she ended up getting arrested. And so Connor and Tim make their way onto the motorcycle and drive off here. And then we start to see the Terminator in frame. He's starting to look around. So now we cut to Sarah Connor, and she's in this weird, goofy dream sequence with Kyle Reese. So Kyle is coming to Sarah, going on and reminding her about the message that he gave her, and that also she should be right now be focusing on John Connor, how he's alone. She needs to protect him. And And so, even also, Kyle is to remind Sarah of the things that she told him in the first movie, like "on your feet, soldier," and that also there are to be reminding moments of like "I love you and I always will." To where at some point Sarah goes on and I think ends up telling John the same thing. So, but here is where the main thing of what Kyle has to say to Sarah that kind of goes on and echoes at some point later on in the film. Kyle goes on and mentions about the whole message: the future is not set. There is no fate but what we make for ourselves. And so all of a sudden Sarah is to be face to face with Kyle, and then all of a sudden he disappears, and Sarah starts to look around, and then Kyle is to just to kind of be evading her, and Sarah is now running through the mental hospital as if she is to be free, but then we find out that this is just all a dream anyways, because she had been drugged out, so it makes sense for how she's just dreaming about Kyle and escaping. So but if anything, this dream is to eventually end with Sarah making her way back onto the playground because iconically we just have to mesh these things together. So Sarah goes on and opens these double doors to find her way into this playground where she is to look on at this playground and be shaking this fence. There is going to be times where Sarah is going to look at the altered version of her that if she was to have never gone on and had this stuff occur within the first movie, she probably would still go on and be working at that diner like she did in the first movie and have that apron and clothing like she had gone on to have in the first film and that diner, which is really cool how they connected that from the first film to now this film to say that if Sarah Connor wouldn't have known of anything of this going on at all, that she would have still been working at that diner. So that's a cool bit of imagery there that they connected. So as Sarah wakes up from this dream, we now cut to Sarah speaking with Dr. Silverman and trying to figure out a way if Sarah has now been improving or if Sarah is just doing and saying anything that'll just make Silverman just write Sarah off as another 6 months for her to stay here, which that will be the case. So Silverman is showing a video of Sarah acting very violent and to be very paranoid of the past and talking about the dreams that she's been having about the world ending and how all she sees is this big bright light and eventually how everyone just turns into paper and then flies off like leaves. So Sarah goes on to explain to Silverman in this past video that if no one is going to believe that this future is going to happen when this day does occur, that she will be right about this, and that if anything, if people aren't going to be wearing sunblock, they're not going to be able to go on and refute that Sarah wasn't wrong either. So after going on and having this escalate in this video to where Sarah goes on and aggressively starts attacking people in the video, and Silverman decides to finally cut it off. So Sarah goes on to explain to Silverman how she's feeling a lot better, and if anything, she's to finally realize that if anything of what she felt before isn't at all true. And Silverman also goes on and asks Sarah, it's like, well, hey, like, what are you striving for? Like, what are you trying to accomplish here? And Sarah's like, well, I really want to go on and really want to show you how better I am, so that way I can go on and get into a less uh, secure wing, so that way I can finally go on and see my son and get visitors. And so Silverman is to go on and be like, well, so now you're going on and tell me that the Terminator machines, they don't exist. And Sarah's like, well, yeah, they no longer exist. And so eventually Silverman just goes on to kind of hear Sarah out but doesn't believe any of it. And then we cut to Dyson at this laboratory. So we'd cut to have one of these lab techs that makes his way to Dyson, explaining how, considering their needing to have him sign out the chips and the Terminator arm to show that he will later on be the only one that can get to them later, and knows where or how to get to them. So Dyson with this technician, as they make their way around, the Dyson technician goes, or the technician goes on to ask Dyson, like, hey, do you know where any of these futuristic things had come from? And Dyson has no answer. So Dyson makes his way to this door that has to have two different keys to open. And then Dyson makes his way to the chip and the arm, looks at them, and then we cut to Silverman and Connor. So Silverman goes on to say to Connor, you know what, I know how smart you are, and I think you're just going on and telling me everything you want me to hear. So Silverman is just realizing that Sarah is just telling him whatever, so that way uh, she'll be able to go on and get what she wants. And Silverman is to just be like, well, if anything, I'm going to keep you here for another 6 months because you have not really gone on to fully believe what you're telling me. You're just telling me a lie. Uh, and if anything, like, you're really not going on and making me feel like I've been able to help or cure you. So yeah, like, we're gonna have you just stick around here just so you learn your lesson. So Sarah is pleading with Silverman to say that please don't go on and do this. Like, Sarah is just so desperate to see her son. Sarah is to say how naked John is without her being there for him. And Sarah even pleads to just make a phone call, and Silverman won't allow her even to do that. So at this point, Sarah does go on and attack Silverman again, choking him out, to then force all the orderlies and all these other people to kind of swoop in with all these drugs to try and try to stop Sarah from killing Silverman or anyone else. And then Silverman turns to the camera. It's like, yeah, model citizen. So now we cut to John and Tim that are making their way through this canal. So Here's the first time where the Terminator has spotted both Connor and Tim and is following and trying to figure out where exactly they're heading. So now we have the T-1000 that is driving by this mall to meet these two girls, and the girl goes on to state, yeah, like, the guys that we met had both talked about going to the Galleria, and the T-1000's like, Galleria? And it's like, yeah. So as Connor and Tim make their way to the arcade of the mall, we have the Terminator that is going by and looking out of the motorcycles, matching up to realize, like, okay, this is John's motorcycle. He did head here, so now I just need to go into this location to figure out where he is. So the Terminator makes his way through the mall with a box full of bouquet of roses, but also a shotgun. And that is kind of an interesting way to just to figure out how to disguise his weapon in a public area. So the T-1000 is going on to show pictures of people to hope that they will know where John was heading or if they had seen him. So as people start pointing out to the T-1000 where he should be heading, so Tim goes on and turns to Connor and explains how he needs to get more quarters and he'll be right back. As Tim goes on and leaves, he's to be met by the T-1000 showing a picture of Connor, asking where he is, and of course, Tim goes on to lie um, to try to figure out a way to separate Tim from the T-1000 so Tim could go on and make his way to Connor to explain, hey, yeah, this guy's looking for you. You need to bail. You need to get out of here. So Connor goes on and spots the T-1000, and the T-1000 spots Connor. So as Connor starts to run and the T-1000 starts to follow, Tim is to try to stop the T-1000 by pointing out where he's supposed to go, or hoping that he's going to go, and he doesn't, and the T-1000 just thrusts Tim out of the way. So now we have Connor making his way into the back of this mall where he's unauthorized to be in, because we have one guy that works here. They're like, hey, man, you shouldn't be here. So the next thing we see is coincidentally that the Terminator is to somehow figure out exactly where Connor is, which doesn't make any sense, and starts to make his way also through the back parts of this mall, and is to inevitably take his flowered box and rip it away to then have this shotgun appear. And we're almost in some ways kind of recreating the first film, if you really think about it here. Because at the Techno Noir, the first interaction between Sarah and the Terminator has the Terminator go on and take its gun and point it at Sarah, and then all of a sudden Kyle comes bursting in with this shotgun and starts blasting away at the Terminator, then separating and having everyone scramble away from the Tech Noir. This scene goes on to have now the Terminator being the Kyle Reese position to go on and thrust out its shotgun to then try to take out the T-1000. So as now Connor is in between both the T-1000 and the Terminator, and Connor is now looking back and forth, what the heck is going on? So the Terminator tells Connor to get down, and he does, and so now the Terminator starts taking a shotgun out and blasting away at the T-1000, to then in turn have the T-1000 whip out his pistol and start blasting at the Terminator. So since the Terminator is to try to go on and protect Connor here, he grabs Connor and then hucks him and kind of protects him to where all the the gunfire of the T-1000 is getting blasted all over the Terminator's back. So, which is a really cool scene. Um, of this just massive effect of all these like kind of rippling of bullets and John Connor screaming because he's just so like, what the heck is going on here? So the Terminator thrusts Connor into this door and then starts to take his shotgun out and blast further into the T-1000 to where eventually he, of the impact of the bullets, falls in the ground like we see here. So the T-1000 obviously gets back up as the Terminator is to think like, well, okay, like what's kind of going on here? Like he's kind of assessing or trying to figure out what his next objective is. So the T-1000 gets right back up, grabs onto the shotgun, and there's a wrestling of it. And here's where the Terminator goes onto this like weird hug or dance with the T-1000 and thrusts him through all these walls. I'm like, man, these walls in this movie are very weak, and that's so weird to me. Even to the point where the Terminator like thrusts through the wall in the later part of the film, which obviously in a science laboratory you would think that the walls would be like very thick concrete, but I guess I'd be wrong. But anything, it's just kind of so funny to just see these Terminators thrust through the walls the way they do. It's kind of like me going on and rewatching Universal Soldier, where uh, where Devereaux's character goes on and smashes through all the walls through all the hotel, and then he finds out that there's this big, thick concrete wall, and so the girl turns to Devereaux. It's like, yeah, bash through the wall, and he's like, no, like this one is a little bit more difficult. So, but obviously, I love the visual of them just bursting through these walls. Like it shows how like they're metal machines and how durable they are, but also like we go on to see that like movies at some point try to recreate this. Like look at even the Marvel Punisher movie that has Thomas Jane in it against Kevin Nash's character, the Russian, where they're just thrusting through all these walls, and then they're fighting in these like bathrooms and destroying all these things. It's a very visually fun bit of action scene within the Punisher film. So, as the T-1000 and the Terminator thrust their way into now this store, and the T-1000 thrusts the Terminator through this display window, the Terminator falls and then gets right back up, and then everyone is just in awe of like, man, like this guy should have really been taken down, but he's just getting right back up like nothing happened. So the Terminator makes his way back through the background of this mall to chase after the T-1000 and Connor, as Connor is now getting on his motorcycle and the T-1000 is chasing him on foot, which is like, man, Robert Patrick had to have been very well cardioed in this movie, because I'm like, man, Robert Patrick on foot is really chasing down John Connor on a motorcycle. Like, we could probably say that maybe the motorcycle was like slowed down or what. No, like, if anything, no, it makes all the sense in the world that John Connor is to be chasing against a machine-like thing that is to almost get to his same pace, but also it's to just be an incredible visual to see that Robert Patrick is really chasing this motorcycle the way he is. And like, I'd gone on to also see the remake of Dawn of the Dead, where we'd see quite early in that film where there's a guy that's actually just chasing down a car while this woman is driving off away from her her now dead zombified husband, and quite a visual that is. But so kind of matching everything that I've gone on to see to review in this channel so far. So as Connor is now as quickly possible figuring out a way to get out of this parking garage and make his way onto the streets. We then have the T-1000 that finds a trucker nearby, thrusts him out of his semi-truck, and then starts to chase off against Connor. So, and then we see the Terminator via a motorcycle kind of racing off to hope to get to Connor before the T-1000 does. Because all of this is to really start in the very beginning to say, yeah, that there's two Terminators coming now, and who's gonna get to Connor first. Like that's the whole race against time that this movie all of a sudden becomes. So it's quite fun about how we'd see that the Terminator motorcycle causes car accidents, and then also the T-1000 goes on and causes a number of accidents. Also, just bashes into a number of cars. Like none of this was planned, and all of it. Like I'm like, wow, this is so cool to just see all these like random accidents happening. Because I'm like, man, this movie has a lot of money to kind of create all this. So Connor gets a good distance away into the canal, thinking that he has now lost the T-1000. To come to find that all of a sudden, as Connor is to look above at this bridge, come flying in is to be the massive truck of the T-1000 to really show how devoted this T-1000 is to get to Connor, and flying its way to get to him has then Connor then be like, oh my god, like this thing is still coming. So Connor blazes off as the T-1000 somehow with his vehicle is still to follow. It really has taken a massive beating, but if anything, it's still on the chase. While we're seeing this chase occur, we also see off to the side that the Terminator is also trying to match its way to try to intercept the T-1000, but also to try to intercept to get to Connor before the T-1000 can run him over, run him down. So, as Connor is to try to pop a wheelie away, and the Terminator is to be busting through all these gates with the shotgun to get further along to try to go to a point where he can do this whole massive jump that has him drop down to now get him into the same canal as both T-1000 and Connor. So now the Terminator just needs to figure out how he can slide his way into getting past the T-1000 as the T-1000 is start to know that the Terminator is to be behind him, so the T-1000 is heavily swerving. So the Terminator is to find this little crack where he can eventually slide past the T-1000, goes on to grab John Connor, thrusts him onto his motorcycle, and now, after certain points after this big, huge, massive truck has even lost its windshield, and the T-1000 is having to like thrust the windshield away and further chase off against this now motorcycle that's firing off these shotgun bullets and firing off against the massive truck's tire to try to take it out. But then ultimately the big stopgap is for the Terminator and Connor to drive past this little bridge that isn't big enough to fit a big massive truck like the T-1000s. So the truck smashes through this bridge and explodes, and so the Terminator kind of pulls back, is curious what had happened, pulls out its shotgun, and is to think that the T-1000 is still going to be coming, because this is so early in the film anyways. All of a sudden we see a tire rolling, and then the T-1000 says, oh, like, I'll just leave then. And then shortly thereafter that, all of a sudden, the T-1000 shows up as this liquid metal silver version of itself, and then eventually will go on and become the normal human version of himself. So as the Terminator and Connor drive off, we immediately have Connor that throws up the T sign, like time out, and wants the Terminator to kind of peel over. So John Connor is trying to figure things out. Connor realizes that the man sitting in front of him is a Terminator, and why is it that he is not going on and trying to kill him, but instead trying to protect him? And so the Terminator goes on to explain that yes, he is a Terminator from Cyberdyne Systems Model 101, and that if anything, he is much more here now to protect John Connor. And when Connor asks who had sent him back, the Terminator goes on and says, well, you did. And so it's like, oh, okay, that is to be much more understanding of why of it exactly having to be the Terminator that is working on their side instead of working on the side of Skynet. So we'd also have the Terminator that goes on to explain about the human tissue over metal endoskeleton, and so because John is kind of looking around at the Terminator's body and seeing the bullet holes of his jacket and like poking at his cheek did kind of feel how different it is compared to humans. So Connor is to figure out that the Terminator is not there to kill him. He's figured that out all himself. And oh wait, that's I've already kind of gotten to this point, so I'm kind of getting past this point already. So I was trying to figure out what else to say here. So now we cut to there being the whole chaos going on in the mall. There's like ambulances and police cars all to be sent, and here's where we find the T-1000 that goes on and takes a police car that no one else is to be kind of manning. So he goes inside of it and steals another police car. So as now the Terminator and Connor are driving along here, here is where the Terminator goes on to explain to Connor about the T-1000, about how he's a prototype and how he's liquid metal, and how he also goes on like liquid alloy, all these like weird goofy things, liquid polyalloy or whatever. It's like this weird technical thing that I'm just like, man, Arnold, you really know your stuff, Arnold. So as both Terminator and Connor make their way to this phone booth, Connor is to ask Terminator for a quarter, and the Terminator just bashes the machine. So Connor just wants to call his step-parents just to warn him, or just to warn them, but the Terminator realizes how this is a waste of time. So as Connor calls his parents, Janelle evidently ends up answering here. So consistently, Janelle is to consistently ask, like, where are you? Everything all right? So the more concern that Janelle really has over Connor, Connor turns to the Terminator. It's like, yeah, she never acts this nice. It's so unlike her. So eventually there is some arguments going on in the background with Todd yelling at this stupid mutt. It's like, man, yeah, we never should have gotten that thing, and so Connor goes on over the phone and tells the Terminator that strangely that the dog is more barking than it usually is. And the Terminator is to really very much know what exactly is going on. So the Terminator takes the phone call from Connor and enters the line himself, and then goes on to speak with Janelle as John and asks Connor what the name of the dog is. And instead of saying Max, he ends up saying, "Didn't you know Wolfie's really barking? Like, is he okay?" And Janelle's to go on and say, like, "Well, yeah, Wolfie's fine, wooded." And so immediately, shortly thereafter that, the Terminator hangs up the line and says, your foster parents are dead." And it's like, man, like this line is honestly just so cool. Like this whole exchange where they figure that out. Uh, Plus, also in this weird scene, where we see the T-1000 that kills the dog and then looks at the collar of the dog and then notices that it's Max, and the T-1000's like, "Ah, they figured me out." So Janelle, because of Todd going on and being a non-factor here, plus also how Todd is just yelling and arguing, kind of being a nuisance. Janelle goes on and is to have killed Todd while she was talking with Connor on the phone. And then we get to see how Todd has this like dangling milk carton onto the liquid metal Terminator's arm, and how he's just like he's just dead, and it just looks so visually interesting. So the Terminator pulls out his arm and then turns back to its normal T-1000 self. So it's also quite interesting after that how when the Terminator has to explain about how the liquid metal Terminator can change its form, and how Connor goes on and says like, "Well, hey, how about it just turns into a pack of cigarettes, or if it just turns into a bomb to get me?" And the Terminator writes off how that can't be just so easily accomplished. If anything, in this film, at some point, the liquid metal Terminator turns into a floor, which I thought was like, okay, how is it that he can go on and do something like that? But also, why didn't they do a lot more with that in this film? Like, at some point, they really could have gone on and worked the whole, like, thing that he can, like, shapeshift. I wish they would have used that a lot more. Kind of like in the next movie where Connor's future wife character, I don't remember what her name is, she goes on and she inevitably finds that her boyfriend is to be meeting her in this spot, so she runs off to meet with him. But then Connor explains about how that's not, or somebody goes on to explain about how that's actually a Terminator and not to actually be her lover. And then unfortunately, her lover is actually dead. And then it's like, oh yeah, it is. It's the Terminator. So, but anyways, so after the T-1000 goes on and finds out about the whole Max dog collar thing, he just starts to comb through Connor's entire room and finds this secret poster that has this shoebox that has all these pictures in them. So we now cut to Sarah Connor that is speaking to an officer. I believe his name is Mossberg in the credits, but also I'm not quite sure. So if anything, I'm just kind of not bothering to really look at a good chunk of the credits here to figure out if I'm right or not, because I could not be bothered. So, because I'm just trying to fast pace through this whole thing. So Mossberg goes on to explain to Sarah about how there was a guy that went through a police station and killed a number of men in the past, and now has resurfaced again at this mall a number of days ago, and is hoping that Sarah has answers to that, which she obviously doesn't. And so eventually they start to realize that they're kind of going nowhere. So we now cut back to John and the Terminator. And so Connor is to go on and finally admit that his mother was telling the truth. And Connor is to also go on and mention about the past love lives that Sarah has had, that there had been an ex Green Beret guy, but eventually Sarah had ruined it by telling him all about the future, and so John goes on and asks the Terminator about uh, getting Sarah Connor, and the Terminator is like, "Well, no, I don't think that'll be the best strategy, because if the T-1000 knows about Sarah Connor, he will go on to get to her, try to look like her, so that way he can get to you, and so that is to be a thing of if we try to go on and if we try to rescue her, we'll find out that we'll have to fight her." So, and eventually, uh, Connor realizes that if that's T-1000's plan, that if anything, they need to try to get to Sarah before the T-1000 does. And eventually, as the Terminator grabs Connor, and Connor's like, "What are you doing?" And the Terminator is trying to protect Connor from himself, but also realize that, or also having probably Connor realize in some ways that the Terminator grabbing onto John Connor is to be a good idea, because John Connor is putting himself into jeopardy that doesn't really need to be having him be put into jeopardy. It's kind of like in The Rise of the Machines, where John Connor goes off with the woman to try to get back into Skynet to try to stop it from happening, and eventually the Terminator goes on to tell John Connor, "Yeah, it was kind of a mood point for you even to go on and try to stop Skynet, because by the time that you get there, it's going to be too late. So if anything, you guys just have to go on and go into this bomb shelter and hide away, because Judgment Day is inevitable." But so, but here the Terminator is grabbing onto John Connor because he's putting his life at risk, and so, and also that protecting Sarah Connor could probably be a mood point anyways, because we find in later iterations or later sequels that Sarah is to inevitably not live long enough to fully be in certain sequels. But then also we have Dark Fate that kind of retcons all that. So yeah, because in the sequel they write Sarah off as being dead, but then Dark Fate retcons all that to be like, "Oh no, Sarah Connor is still alive." So it's kind of like this weird retconning and weird goofy thing, uh, that also, uh, like we have to at some points kind of pretend which Terminator movie we will accept, because the future is not set. So, and a number of timelines and weird wonky is to happen. So, but I think it's kind of funny how like Dark Fate is to say that, "Oh yeah, anything after Terminator 2, none of that all exists." But then on top of that, they go on and they deliver Dark Fate, which was not as good as any of the other films in between Terminator 2 and what is Dark Fate. So it's just kind of like, yeah, you're going to say that Dark Fate is going to be even way better than Terminator 3? I don't think so. But if anything, people can disagree with me on that, and that's perfectly fine. Uh, so, so here's where Connor falls, and then we have the jocks come in as Connor is now screaming for help. So, as these massive jock guys come in, and they start to wrestle with the Terminator, and the Terminator goes on and grabs one of the jocks by the hair, and then the other goes on and comes up from behind the Terminator, and so the Terminator goes on and rips away the other guy's arm, and then as the one guy starts to fall on top of the car, the Terminator whips out his gun, and Connor, with seconds to spare, is to thrust himself in front of these jock guys, hoping that Terminator will not fire his gun, and then goes on to say, well, hey, you were just going to kill those guys. And the Terminator is like, well, my name kind of states that all I do is kill. So, in turn, Connor is to say, it's like, well, then you're going to swear to me that you're not going to kill people. And it's something that you just can't do. So, we now have the T-1000 getting to the state hospital, and is to be waved in by this gate security guard. So we have Sarah Connor that is going on to, I guess, being prepped for bed, and Douglas comes in and is to be checking on Sarah, and then licks her in the face, like there are so very few gross images within movies, but that has to be on the top of my motherfucking list. That and the Nightmare on Elm Street, where the girl is on the phone and then all of a sudden the phone licks her. It's like, ugh. I think there also is like a scene where somebody ends up getting like viciously licked, and I think it has something to do with Cameron Diaz. That also was to just be like really haunting, for some odd reason. Like, was it in like something about Mary, or was it The Mask that just like ugh? There's something about Cameron Diaz either licking somebody or getting licked. Maybe that was in something about Mary. Anyways, so as Douglas walks off, Sarah Connor is to pull out the paperclip that she had gone on to receive while speaking with Mossberg, with all of these files and everything just thrusted onto this table. Sarah had gone on to get to this paperclip so she can eventually figure out how to escape this state prison, or this state hospital. Feels like a prison almost. So, as the T-1000 starts to make its way through the hospital, eventually he goes on to meet with this woman who's Gwen, which luckily her name came up right away. For how there's a bit of dialogue here. So, and honestly, it's kind of surprising when people have names and then they don't have names in this film. But either way, so the T-1000 goes on to ask if a Sarah Connor is here, and then Gwen turns to the T-1000 like, oh, like, if anything, the rest of your buddies are all coming to meet up with you, as if Gwen assumes that the T-1000 has some connection with these other police officers, which he doesn't. And then when Gwen looks back, all of a sudden the T-1000 has disappeared. So, we next would all of a sudden have this officer by the name of Lewis that makes his way to the vending machine and starts to get this coffee. And Lewis ends up asking Gwen if she wants a coffee. It's like she's like, "No, I want a beer." So Lewis finds that that's a nice joke, and that eventually looks at the coffee cup that has these cards on it. Lewis is to be just so happy that all of a sudden his coffee cup shows a full house, and he says that it's his lucky day. We'll find out a little bit shortly here that that exactly won't be true. Because all of a sudden, coming out of the floor and out of the the tiles of this um, bit of floor behind him, the T-1000 comes rising up to eventually become Lewis, and then goes on to put a finger blade into his eye socket to then kill him, and then have Lewis be dragged off into this janitor's closet, and then uh, the T-1000 is to take Lewis's gun. Come to find out, if anybody was to think that for some odd reason that the Lewis and the other person that looks very much like Lewis, if they just did that via CGI, no. These guys are actually to be legitimately twins. And if anything, some people can know that that's actually true by watching the movie Dog Day Afternoon, the Robin Williams movie, where at some point Robin is working alongside these twins, so they're legitimately twins. And it's kind of cool to see them also here in this film. Um, so, so as Sarah eventually makes her way into trying to unlock uh, the door of her room by using these paper clips, we then inevitably have Douglas be making his rounds, and then it's to see that this janitor's closet is to have this mop broken off of it. All of a sudden, Sarah comes flying in, hits Douglas in the face, taking him out. And so Sarah goes on, hides Douglas's body in her room. I guess that is to really get even for that whole lick of the face from before. And so Sarah starts running around to figure out how to escape this prison, while kind of stopping at certain points when she is to notice people kind of passing by through these windows. So the T-1000 shifts from being Lewis to then being back to its normal default self. So now we cut to both the Terminator and John Connor driving by just these random settings to get to the hospital, knowing that they're on their way. So Sarah Connor runs to find that there's an orderly and Dr. Silverman that are going over some medication information, and Sarah goes on to knock out the orderly, and then goes on and kind of smashes Silverman's thigh to kind of drop him down. Like, she basically just kind of clips him to where he kind of falls backwards. So Silverman is to mention about how his arm is broken, and Sarah goes on to say how, like, there's 215 bones in the body. That's one. And so Sarah goes on and finds this jug of liquid Rooter, and tries to use uh, this needle and pokes into it, and tries to get stuff out of the liquid Rooter. Which immediately we have Silverman. It's like, well, what are you doing? So Sarah's play is that she's going to go on and use this syringe as a threat to people that don't know what it is, that she's going to use this against Silverman and for them to need to go on and need to let her out of this prison. So she's using Silverman as a hostage. So as the Terminator and Connor make their way to the gate, Connor goes on and has the Terminator swear that he won't kill anybody. So the Terminator and Connor make their way to the gate, and immediately we have the guard at the gate explaining their visiting hours, and all of a sudden Terminator whips out his gun, fires onto the legs of the Terminator, and he drops. And the Terminator goes on and hits this button for the gate to open, and Connor's like, "What did I just say?" And the Terminator turns to Connor. It's like, "He'll live." And so they get back on the bike and they drive off because it's kind of true that he probably will bleed out, but if anything, he probably will live anyways. So here is where Sarah meets into this kind of more secure area where there is to be this more of like a security guard, more of like a police officer, as she's wearing this kind of very khaki like a wardrobe, and I have no idea who she actually is, so I'll call her like I'll call her a security guard because I don't know any better. So Sarah goes on and is to hoist this needle against Silverman's neck, explaining that she wants out, and so eventually the security is to try to reason with Sarah as the orderlies start to make their way to Sarah, hoping that by the time that Sarah and Silverman make their way to meet them, that they'll be able to take Sarah out and figure out how to just kind of knock her out here. So, or figure out a way to kind of subdue her. So, Sarah and Silverman are to be pushed along to where the orderlies cannot go on and can't get any closer to Sarah. But then, as Sarah turns her back to where she's heading, all of a sudden there's another orderly that surprises Sarah and grabs onto her, to where then Sarah needs to go on and start to punch and knock down this guard and then run off. Silverman goes on and explains to all the orderlies, like, get after her, go on. So here's where we see the T-1000 getting closer to Sarah's location. We start to see some familiar areas, and so now here's the chase that goes on here. Sarah tries to go on and run through all these areas that have all these doors that need to be opened by all these keys. Sarah goes on and has all these doors come swinging back closed, and then eventually, as it's the race for the orderlies to get into these doors that they have to open with these keys, eventually Sarah will go on and break off one of the keys, so it makes it very difficult for the orderlies to get past this certain point. Sarah starts to run to the elevator, hoping that at some point she'll exit this effing place, and she'll run into the Terminator that is to meet her at the elevator, where she is to be frightened and realize that this thing is coming after her because she doesn't know any better. Connor then goes on and is to try to tell his mother that's like, no, like this guy is on our side. He's gonna try to protect us, he's gonna help us. But Sarah is to just be in fear because she knows of the Terminator, and this is to be haunting from her past and bringing up a lot of trauma. So Sarah runs back the other way and eventually finds that there's a number of orderlies that just kind of dogpile all over her and try to inject her with things to knock her out. The Terminator then comes in and is to start grabbing onto the orderlies and hucking them into windows and into doors. And eventually so the security guard goes and like smashes the Terminator via the head, and it breaks the sunglasses but doesn't go on to do anything to the Terminator. As the security guard ends up getting hucked here, here's where the Terminator whips out his hand to Sarah Connor, saying, "Come with me if you want to live." So, as Sarah gets up, here's where they find that the T-1000 is to just slide his way through this security door like it's nothing. And at some point, I think I had gone on to see like a behind the scenes thing of how exactly they did this whole cell thing. But it always just looks so cool to me how they actually accomplished this and how visually interesting this looks. So the T-1000 just slides through this prison cell but gets his gun caught. And so after he gets his gun caught, he then is to start racing after the Terminator and Connor with his pistol out, blasting them. The Terminator and Sarah and John will all get into the elevator, but eventually the T-1000 will use its metal arms to try to reopen the door to where the Terminator goes on and takes a shotgun, blasting the Terminator right in the face, splitting the T-1000 in half. To then, the next thing we see is to have the Terminator to be looking above him as the T-1000 is to now be on top of the elevator trying to get inside. So we had the consistent blasting of both the Terminator and Sarah with her pistol blasting away onto the roof of this elevator, while at some point the T-1000 is to stab into Sarah, which brings her down and has her just kind of hunch down a lot more and just start to firing above into the elevator. As they now get into this parking garage and Sarah throws a pistol up to try to get the cop out of the cop car, we have the T-1000 liquid metal making its way from the elevator rooftop to just slither down inside to the elevator, which, if anything, that probably should have been the first thing it tried to have done, but it didn't. So, as Sarah, Connor, and Terminator are all getting into this cop car, they are trying to go on and backwards their way out of this parking garage while now the T-1000 is on foot chasing after them. Eventually, as they curve back to then start driving forward so that way they can even quicker get away from the T-1000, the T-1000 is now gaining onto the car, going on to using its metal arms, then latch on to the back of the car, smashing the back windshield, and starting to get ever so much closer to Connor, to where the Terminator goes on and tells Sarah to take the wheel, as the Terminator goes on to use its shotgun to start blasting away at the liquid metal Terminator to have him fall off of the car, to then have Connor notice that there's one liquid metal piece that is lastingly left, to where he hucks it over to the side. And the T-1000 goes on and gathers back up its piece to be part of it. And so as of course it is to be very light or very dark outside, it's quite interesting how John and Sarah ask the Terminator, it's like, can you even see anything while you're driving at night? And the Terminator says, no, I can see everything. And then we see through his eyes that everything is to be red and how he can very much even see at night. So that's kind of interesting. So as they're driving along, here's where Sarah goes on to say to John that he should have never went back for her. That if anything, she could have figured out how to save herself. And if anything, John is too important. And what was he thinking? So as John starts to cry here with emotions of just being upset that Sarah is just kind of ungrateful for her. She got freaking saved. If anything, if the Terminator and John would have been able to save her, Sarah would have never gotten out of that hospital. Plus, also the T-1000 would have came for her anyways. So the Terminator goes on and turns to Connor and asks, "Why is he crying?" And Connor just shrugs it off. So now Sarah turns to the Terminator and asks, "What is your story?" And so now, uh, we then find the T-1000 that finds a police officer now on a bike. And it's like, "Hey, nice bike." And he goes on and he takes it for himself. So, where are we at? How far along are we? Wow, we are way far away. So that's fine. I was just figuring out like how much time do I have left here because we have 2 hours and 30 minutes. So in this scene here, the Terminator, Sarah, and John make their way to this garage, and they sew up Sarah's back, and then they take all the bullets out of the Terminator. And as they continue to talk and they find out more about the Terminator, they find out that there's a way that the Terminator can learn more, and it seems that Skynet has inhibited from being able to do something like that. So we have a scene here where we kind of have to go on and do like the Tony Stark ripping out the power battery, and Gwen or Pepper needs to go on and figure out the housing of this whole thing, and she gets upset for Tony having to do this, and so eventually after they figure it all out, and Tony is to be completely fine. Like, yeah, there's like this weird, just wacky bit of a scene going on in there. So what we do is Sarah and Connor is to pull out eventually this chip out of the Terminator's head, and eventually as they do that, all of a sudden the Terminator stops talking and is just dead. So after they pull out the chip, there is even at a point where Sarah is tempted to destroy the chip, and John is to try to stop her from doing so, explaining that they need this Terminator to help them, that if anything, he's on their side. And Sarah's like, "Well, but what is to happen if he turns against us? Like, any number of things could happen here. Like, we can't be sure that he can be trusted." But if anything, Sarah does go on and feel tempted that she's going to destroy the chip, but decides against it. So eventually, as the Terminator comes back online, the Terminator asks both Sarah and Connor if there was any issues, and Connor says no, there wasn't any. So the Terminator crashes through this door of this car to then have everybody get into this car that they have now stolen. This kind of station wagon, old fashioned like car. So they make their way to this place to go on and eventually get food. As also Connor is to go on and give Terminator all these catchphrases that eventually he will be using at some point in the movie, like dipshit or chill off or cool off or hasta la vista baby. So as they're to kind of park to get food for a short amount of time, burgers and fries and what have you, here's some interesting bit of scenes where Connor is hoping that he can train the Terminator on how to smile, and eventually turns to a guy who's on this phone and realizes that he's smiling, so the Terminator should try to copy that kind of same visual. And so as the Terminator tries to smile, it looks very weird and scary looking, to the point to where Connor says, "Well, maybe we'll train you on how to smile via a mirror or something." Which later on we see the Terminator kind of smirking a lot, kind of going on like he's kind of like side smiling a lot. So the Terminator is pouring uh like antifreeze or oil into the car, and all of a sudden he's seeing that two kids are fighting, and Connor is to say to the Terminator, it's like, well, yeah, like we're not going to make it, are we, as a human race? And the Terminator is like, well, yeah, it seems that humans are so easily wanting to destroy themselves. So, like, if anything, um, like that's not going to be helpful for the future. So Sarah goes on and asks the Terminator about Skynet and how exactly it is to have been built and the whole origins of it. And the Terminator talks about Miles Dyson and talks about the cyber system, and eventually Terminator talks about in 3 years, um, how eventually the Cyberdyne systems end up getting upgraded and end up having a number of military things that become unmanned, and eventually that's when Skynet becomes self-aware and starts to uh, begin to learn at a geometrical rate. Going on to say that eventually Skynet will eventually pull the plug, and or no, wait, as everybody tries to pull the plug on Skynet, Skynet will strike back, and eventually will release a bunch of nuclear vessel, nuclear vessels, nuclear weapons onto Russia, and John will be like, well, hey, like, why are we going on and why would we be attacking Russia? Aren't they our friends? And the Terminator says, yeah, we're just going on and attacking Russia, so Russia will attack us and wipe us all out. So now we have Miles Dyson, who is going on with his wife Teresa, and I really actually did have to look that up because I don't remember her name ever. I just don't. So Teresa's going on and surprising Miles with a lick on the back of his neck and surprising him because Miles is not really paying attention to her because Miles is so just focused on his computer work and he's so close. So Teresa is talking about how she wants them to go on uh, to enjoy this raging waters thing and finally let Miles kind of get away from it all. And Miles is to go on and be focused on this computer and realize that he is to put together this central processor or this neutral net processor. So Miles goes on to explain about how this whole processor will leave things to be unmanned. Like, could you just imagine going on and taking a plane ride where you don't need a pilot for it? And you don't have to be paranoid if a pilot is going to go on and have a hangover or is have a number of technical issues that will leave the plane to eventually crash, or any number of things that will kind of take the human error uh, out of things. So eventually, Teresa will realize that Miles, no matter how much they love him, if anything, he doesn't really need them. That all he needs is just uh, this mechanism that is to be his baby, the thing that he's made, and but if anything, also at the same time, he needs to focus on his other babies, uh, so that way they can have some fun time together. Because if anything, it's the whole fact of like, if Miles doesn't go on and spend time with his family now, he may never really get to spend time with them, because eventually his kids will outgrow him and have their own separate lives, and then Miles will never go on to have spent any quality time with his family. So as Danny and his sister comes in, Miles is going like, okay, let's go to the raging waters and let's have a bit of fun. So now we cut to Sarah making her way to Enrique's kind of very wastelandish like area. So like it's just very, it's kind of very deserted, just very like secluded and whatever. So immediately we really can tell how unique this environment is by the number of cobra heads that are all on this fence. So that really sets the scene right away. So as people that probably should not be effed with, Sarah goes on and calls out for Enrique and asks if he's here in Spanish. Uh, a lot of this stuff could probably be lost on a lot of people because they don't speak Spanish. But actually, for me, like a lot of this is kind of simple intro stuff to where I can kind of go on and understand exactly what they're all saying. But also, I even leaned into the subtitles. But so as Enrique springs behind his helicopter, saying that Sarah has become a little bit more jumpy, and as the two of them embrace and hug one another, we then have Sarah that goes on and asks, uh, after being told about some tequila they could drink, that they need clothes, that they need guns, that they need a truck. And Enrique says like, well, hey, get the my tooth fillings, why don't you? So, but if anything, Enrique turns and realizes that there's a new guy with them, and he's trying to figure out who he is. Sarah goes on to explain about how, or I think John goes on to explain about how they explain away that this is just Uncle Bob, and Enrique is like, Uncle Bob, okay, sure. So Enrique goes on and turns to the Terminator and asks if he wants a drink, which he denies it. And then Sarah goes on and takes the drink from him and starts drinking herself. So the next thing we see is both Terminator and Connor making their way through this underground arsenal that's in this like underground bomb shelter. They take this chain and pull away this opening to then go and inside. So John is to mention about how all of this is to have been Sarah's planning ahead and having this whole huge uh, underground bunker was for her to go on and plan for Judgment Day to have happened, so she has all these guns lined up. So Enrique is to have an issue trying to put together this truck for Sarah, and says that they'll need time to fix it, and Sarah's okay with that because she has a Terminator who doesn't sleep anyways, so he'll be able to go on and probably put it together and fix it in no time. So Sarah goes on to explain to Enrique that if anything, things will start to become more dangerous for him here, and that Enrique may go on and want to find himself a way out of this location because someone will probably be looking for them there. So now back with the Terminator and John here. John goes on to talk about his life until Sarah had gotten arrested, and then Connor was then forced to go into regular school and go into foster care and have kids that are only interested in stuff like Nintendo. So as they continue to look around and they start to grab all these things, eventually the one big visual thing is this minigun that the Terminator grabs and starts to look. It's like, smirks. And John is like, yeah, that's definitely you. So Sarah goes on to start to put this machine gun together, and I think she cleans it as both John and the Terminator are fixing up this car and they're underneath it. So John talks about his possible future, about he's going to be this big world leader, and how his mother would always talk to him about Judgment Day, and John is to talk about how he never met his real dad, and if anything, the Terminator says that he will meet his real dad, and Connor says, "Yeah, like I'll be 45 by that time, I think." So, and also John talks about how when he sends Kyle back, it'll be before he was even born, so it's kind of weird and trippy. So, John also talks about how Sarah is to go on and cry quite often, and here's again where the Terminator asks why do people cry, and Connor is like, I don't know, like it's sometimes where it just like we just hurt, and so that's why we cry. So like Connor just explains it away as like, well, like it's kind of an anyways kind of thing. Like you're just uh like you shouldn't be crying, but you cry anyways. Um like there's sometimes where like people just kind of think about things and it just makes them emotional. So as Connor and the Terminator go on to start this car and they high five themselves, and at one point the Terminator slaps Connor's hand and he's like, like, so, because of course his hand is made out of metal anyway, so it makes sense that it hurts. So, Sarah's now watching on, saying how um, the Terminator in some ways could be the perfect father to John, how it'll always be there for him, it'll never leave him or be drunk and be upset with him. Um, that'll never hurt him, that'll always be there to protect him. And so as Sarah goes on and carves into this table no fate, and then falls asleep shortly thereafter that, after there's like a mad scramble going on with everybody gonna like running around, there's dogs running around. And so okay. So here's a scene where Sarah is to go on and watch her self in this diner uh outfit, and she's at this playground. I think I got that confused with the early part of the movie, but I was to go on and try to connect that to just say that that scene was kind of interesting, anyways. Plus, this whole playground scene comes off way too often in this movie. So Sarah goes on to watch her alternate version of herself if she was to never find out that she was to had been at risk with this whole saving the world thing. And Sarah all of a sudden finds herself at this fence again, going on and grabbing at the fence. Eventually, the nuke goes off again, and eventually, she starts to become like paper, and eventually just bursts away into skull and bones. And then eventually, Sarah wakes up to see the thing that she carved into the table that says "No Fate." So Sarah gets all of her gear together and drives off, and John and the Terminator are trying to figure out why. Sarah and or John and the Terminator make their way to Sarah's table and realize that she had carved the whole no fate thing. And so Connor is to connect that with, oh, she's going after Miles Dyson. She's going to blow him away. So they go racing off to follow Sarah, and so the Terminator is realizing that Sarah's going after Dyson, so that way that that Sarah is trying to retroactively stop the war from ever happening. And so and here's where Connor goes on and talks about how we hurt and we have feelings, and that's the reason why people should not be killing people. But so now we cut to Miles, who is on his computer typing away, as there seems to be a motorized truck that is making its way to Miles, going on and eventually going to clip him, to where Miles ends up getting distracted and dealing with his son Danny, that has gone on to be driving this motorized truck. So Teresa is trying to tell Danny, I think, that it's almost time for bed, as he's driving around this motorcycle truck. So the closer and closer that Danny gets with this truck to Dyson, we'd see that Sarah is also getting her target set on Dyson also. So during the perfect time of Danny hitting Miles with this truck, Miles goes on and is to duck conveniently for then this bullet to land into his computer, and now Miles is like, what the heck is going on? So all of a sudden Sarah realizes that there's no way of her being silent anymore, so she goes on and adjusts uh, the machine gun to then start blasting away, really destroying Miles's entire desk, and then forcing Miles to kind of thrust his way through his home to try to protect himself from getting, of course, assassinated. So eventually Sarah comes inside the house, starts to chase after Miles, and eventually Miles is to be shot in the arm, and at some point Miles's family tries to protect Miles from getting killed, or like we even have Danny that is to try to stop Sarah from trying to kill his father by just putting his body over him. So Sarah goes on to confront Miles and explains that this is all his fault. And the more that she is close to wanting to shoot Miles, she's looking at the family, and she's having a hard time pulling the trigger. Sarah goes on and falls back and then takes some time to just kind of process all this. And in the nick of time, that is when Connor and Terminator come in, and the Terminator goes on and is to put pressure on the wound while John is dealing with Sarah. And Sarah is to realize that Connor had come in to try to stop them. And Sarah's like, I love you, John, and I always will. And Sarah realizing that since John was there to stop her, it was actually the right call. So now, uh, John is to pull away Danny to have the two of them go into his room, and John is turning to the Terminator to say to Miles, "Show him." So the Terminator carves into his own arm and rips away the skin to reveal his Terminator arm and explains the whole future to now Miles. To where Sarah goes on and has to narrate here to say that Miles had taken it very well and he said that he's going to be sick. So Miles says that he's going on to say that he's going to quit and that he obviously is not going to build what he was building. And eventually they realize that that's just clearly not good enough. If Miles goes on and leaves, they'll just replace him with somebody else. Like, if anything, also, they have to get rid of the chip and the arm. And Sarah, when revealed that those things still exist, she's like, I knew it! So, they all collectively realize that they have to make their way to the facility to retrieve all these things to make sure that there is no evidence of the future existing so they won't recreate it themselves. So eventually, after everyone comes to this conclusion, Miles is to go on and ask them, it's like, well, hey, when are you wanting to go on and when do you want to go to this facility? And the Terminator looks at Miles like, oh, you want to do this tonight. Also, it's kind of interesting how Teresa has this bit of line where she talks about how they're changing how everything goes, and I kind of like that bit of scene here. But I'm just trying to rush to get this done because we're already 2.5 hours in, anyways. So, plus I still have a lot of ground to cover within this movie because of course I do. So, and this just like, if anything, no one will really care about the length of these videos, anyways. But if anything, I'm trying to get under 3 hours in most of these at least. So, as Miles and the group of people all make their way to this facility, we immediately have this guard that is to look at all these people and be like, well, hey, if anything, we have rules and we can't just let all these people just come all in. And then all of a sudden we have Sarah and Terminator whipping out these pistols and saying otherwise. So the security guard makes his way into the bathroom as he gets tied up and taped. And Miles starts to make his way through the facility, going on to explain about two keys and how they have to go on and how they have to get through some security stations. A security guard goes on and is to find that the main guard is no longer at his post. So the security guard, very upset with the guard who had left to the bathroom, and then sees that he's tied up and then rushes to the silent alarm. So Miles tries to press this key code and then finds that, oddly enough, that like it will no longer take his code. That if anything, everything is just no longer working. And then Miles realizes that alarms have been set off, so there's no way for any code to really be working at this point because nothing will be accessed. So John is going to go on to use his weird credit card code breaker thing to get into the one thing that Miles was trying to get into, as well as also when Miles keeps going through and trying to get into other doorways and can't, the Terminator goes on and takes his grenade launcher out and bursts through it anyways. To where then Sarah and Miles are going on to say fire in the hole. So to John, who's kind of a little bit separated from where they are at. So we have the security guards. They're calling the police, going on and stating about how it's the same guy from the mall. It's the Terminator guy, and for them to just bring everyone available to them right now. So as the Terminator busts through this door and rips off uh, this uh, this this little bit of a door that has these gas masks on it, and give these things to both Sarah and Miles, because Miles goes on to say, "Hey, yeah, there's a gas leak that's going on here. You won't be able to get through here." And all of a sudden, here's where Terminator gives them gas masks, which eventually they'll use later on when the cops are coming in and they start using like tear gas, anyways. So now the T-1000, to have a bunch of now motorcycle gear on, is to have made its way to Miles's home, and is to look through the cars and the wreckage of it all. And then we cut to the Terminator and Sarah and Miles that are all trying to destroy every bit of any kind of information or computer or any bit of knowledge of uh, the Terminator existing and being a thing, and they're just chucking a bunch of equipment around. So at one point, Miles is to turn to the Terminator and asks if he can borrow the axe so he can personally destroy the thing that he had created and spent so much time of his life on. So we now cut to cops swarming the scene, as we also have a helicopter that's flying around also. Shortly thereafter that, we have John that is to use his code breaker to get into the vault with the key, and then all of a sudden notices through cameras that they have company. So as all these canisters start surrounding this room, and Miles asks how exactly they're going to go on and do this whole explosive, and the Terminator shows him this remote control that they'll have to trigger this whole thing. John goes on to explain about how many cops that they are to seemingly be up against, and he basically just says all of them, I think. So the Terminator says that he will handle the police, and John turns to the Terminator. It's like, well, hey, you swore. And the Terminator's like, trust me. So the Terminator breaks this massive window, and then starts to use this minigun and starts to blast all throughout all these cop cars, eventually scaring the police officers away far enough to go back to this trench to just try to block themselves from any more bullets going flying. After the minigun is to run out of ammo, the Terminator switches to a grenade launcher, and then eventually starts to look around at how many human casualties there are, and he figures out there's absolutely zero. So now we cut back to Miles and John, who are using the keys to open to the door to get to both the chip and the metal arm. Miles wants there to be a much more complicated process to get both arm and chip, and John just chucks them onto the ground. The glass breaks, and so they're like, okay, I guess that's easy enough. So, because they're in a race against time anyways, because this is the third act of the movie. So, as we start having them scramble out of there, Sarah goes on and gives John this gas mask because at some point they'll use tear gas or something like that. So, as the Connor group eventually starts to leave here, and Miles and Sarah are the only ones left to get out of there. All of a sudden, here's where this swarm of police officers start bursting their way through these doors and start firing off, having then Miles to get fully blasted with all these bullets, and he goes down with this remote on him. Sarah is to look at Miles. Miles looks back at her. Sarah realizes that she has to go on and just fire off some shots and then back away, but eventually she backs herself into a corner. At some point, uh, John is to notice that Sarah, via looking at these cameras, is to be stuck in a corner somewhere where she can't get out of. And so the Terminator bursts through this wall in order to get to her, and then they all end up getting into this elevator and making their way down. As Miles is now looking at all these police officers and says, I don't know how longer I can hold this. And then the police officers realize that they need to run the heck out of there, or otherwise they're going to explode as well as with Miles. So, as the Terminator makes his way to the ground floor, he tells both Sarah and John to stay here, and I'll be back. We have the line thrown in there. So, the Terminator makes his way through this hallway to eventually be met by a number of police officers that he has to clip via the legs. So, he takes them all down as they blasted heavily into his face and body and everything like that, which eventually he just keeps coming. So, at some point, the Terminator will grab this smoke grenade launcher and will start blasting it into people to create more smoke and to create that all these people are to be choking on it and falling over. And at some point, the Terminator gets this to this armory truck. I don't know exactly if that's the real term of it, but that's what I'm going to say what this is. This real like SWAT massive vehicle van truck thing. So the Terminator goes on and has one of the cops hold this as he goes into the car and drives in and smashes his way through the building to get to then Sarah and John. We then have the T-1000 on the motorcycle that's combing its way through this laboratory. But then as he sees that the Terminator and the Connors are driving off, he then goes on to then fastly speed his way into the sky, jump onto this helicopter, get into said helicopter by bashing his head into it, and then goes on to tell the chopper pilot to get out. So now there's another chase scene going on here as the Terminator with the Connors is now on this truck making their way eventually to the steel mill. We would have the chopper that is following, and so Sarah goes on and calls that there is this chopper to be following them, and Terminator immediately knows that it's him. So as there is a fight going on between both Sarah and both the T-1000 via this shooting battle, eventually at some point Sarah had gone on to try to protect Connor by having him kind of lay under these vests, and eventually at some point Connor will kind of poke his head out and eventually almost get blasted by bullets. So at some point Sarah, I think, does get clipped or does get shot. And so the armory truck or armory van eventually pumps the brakes, and the chopper goes smashing into the back of this truck and then explodes shortly thereafter that. And also the armory van or truck rolls. And so now we have this truck that has this weird wooden house in the back of it. And he goes chasing off to see if the Terminator and the Connors are okay, as well as also we have this cryo truck that goes on to see if the T-1000 is okay, to where the T-1000 goes on and slices into the cryo truck driver's chest and then gets into his truck and starts driving off. So the truck guy who is to go on and check if the Terminator and the Connors were okay ends up seeing the Terminator's face, and then the Terminator goes on to explain to this guy with the truck that, hey, we're taking your truck from you. So at some point, as the truck tries to wave the cryo truck, and the cryo truck does not care, he keeps rolling anyways. Sarah's mentioned about how she's wounded, and so they put pressure onto the wound by giving her something that is going to go on and have her tie, so that way she won't be consistently bleeding out. So at some point, the Terminator goes on and asks for either Sarah or John to take the wheel. The Terminator slides out to then start blasting away at the truck, but then eventually finds that he loses ammo with his grenade launcher. So he then goes on and takes a machine gun and gets ever so closer to the truck and starts blasting away very closely to the T-1000 while he's driving. And this eventually will cause the cryo truck to roll over and eventually the Terminator to slide away from it and get further and further closer to the steel mill. So as the T-1000 gets out of the cryo truck that has been leaking now cryogenic fluid, the T-1000 gets its way closer and closer to the Terminator as the Terminator has now rolled off to the distance. The T-1000 is to start to find that his body is to start to freeze up and is to completely start to break apart. At one point, the T-1000 looks at its broken arm after it is to kind of just fall onto the ground, and then he pulls the arm back out, and his arm breaks away, and he's like, huh? So, as the T-1000 looks at the Terminator, we then have the Terminator that gives him the whole line of Hasta la vista, baby, and completely destroys him. We think that, oh man, this is probably the way that they're going to go on and wipe this thing out. No, it's just a stopgap. So, as Sarah and Connor are getting out of the truck, realizing that they have to now run for it, the Terminator is telling John that they don't have much time. So the Terminator and John grab onto Sarah and start running off to create distance from them in the T-1000. So here's an interesting point here. So the T-1000 goes on and starts making his way through the steel mill, and then all of a sudden accidentally touches onto this railing, and he becomes the railing with his arm, saying to us that this T-1000 has become more so heavily weakened, and at some point he will start to blend into his environment, and that is actually just quite interesting. So that's kind of interesting to see that done here because it's, I don't think, done anywhere else. If that would be one way to figure out who is this liquid metal character, that would be the one way, I guess. But that just doesn't happen in any of the films. Plus, also, it helps us in the third act to figure out who is the real Sarah Connor. But so, and we also see him walking around, and then the steel is going into his feet. It's kind of cool looking of a visual. So the Terminator tells John that he needs to keep going while the Terminator is going to stall and start to fight the T-1000. So eventually, as the Terminator, let me pause here for a second. All right, I needed a little bit of a break because it's like, man, like we're going on for very long here. Plus, also, uh, like I'm getting to the third act, and then also I'm just like, man, I just like I've been sitting for a very long time at this point. So as the Terminator starts to figure out where the T1000 is, the T1000 comes springing on him. The two of them fight it out. As the Terminator starts chucking the T1000 around, it's funny how like there is at one point where like the T1000's back is to be smacking into this wall, but then all of a sudden the T1000 flips and the back of him is now the front of him, and that's a very cool visual. So the Terminator goes on and he punches the T1000 in the face, but then all of a sudden the T1000 goes on and turns back into liquid metal, and then goes on to adjust its body to where now like the liquid metal is like now hands that is kind of controlling the Terminator's hands. Honestly, if they would have gone on and done that a lot earlier in the other fights, but I guess that they're in a much more public place where this is a much more private place, so that's why they're doing that here now, where the liquid metal character can kind of do anything. Like, plus also it's a much more visual, interesting bit of things here to see this at the third act. So the T1000 goes on to capture the Terminator into this gear and then crushes the Terminator's arm, and so the T1000 starts to go after Sarah and Connor. As the Terminator is having to now take this rod and completely dismantle his own arm so that way he can escape from this gear. So Sarah separates John from herself by having him go down this chain and then having him forced to then go on through this uh, bit of weird um, kind of rotational thing where he's having to go on and kind of having to kind of slide his way to kind of hide off from the T1000. Um, this scene will kind of be replicated in Salvation, where Connor is to have Kyle be put through this elevator, and Connor has this moment with Kyle where he goes off and faces off against the Terminator, while Kyle is to have to go on and be like, hey, like you need to stay alive or I'll never be. So so here's where Sarah goes on and starts to fight off against the T1000 using her shotgun to eventually start blasting into the head of the T1000, where we see this huge hole where his eye should be. So as the T1000 shrugs off the shots that Sarah is firing, eventually he'll go on to use his fingers as these metal knives and jab into Sarah's body, threatening her to call out for John. Call for John now. I know that this hurts. And Sarah gives him a good old FU. And so by the time that the T1000 is going to go on and do anything with Sarah, kill her or anything, eventually the Terminator comes in and throws a huge metal rod into the T1000's chest area, then going on and having forced the T1000 to rip the metal rod from his chest area, which is a really just man, so many cool visuals here. So the T1000 goes on and faces off against the Terminator and is now trying to continuously smash his head by going on and ramming him with this huge metal metal uh, I'm trying to think of the word. Um, there's this huge metal scalpel, whatever this is called. So it's a very huge metal piece that the T-1000 is consistently ramming the Terminator with, bashing his head further and further. And so after that, that's not good enough. Eventually, the Terminator is dragging itself onto the ground, trying to make its way back to his grenade launcher. And in this fight scene, Robert Patrick himself had talked about how he actually did accidentally beat up the Terminator. Actually, he did beat up actually Arnold by mistake while they were fighting, and he went a little harder than he probably should have. And if anything, like that was a bit of a mistake on Robert's part, but at least he admits to it. But it also kind of creates a very funny story for this film. So the T-1000 goes on to try and stop the Terminator from getting to the grenade launcher by thrusting this metal rod through his chest to finally have the Terminator have all this like electricity coming off of him, saying that this really had hurt him to where it almost shut him off for a good long time. But his power will all of a sudden alternate, and then eventually the Terminator will be pulling this rod out of his chest to eventually come back to get the grenade launcher. So here's where a Sarah is calling out for John, calling out for him, calling out for help, and John answers. Eventually, as John makes his way to Sarah, eventually he'll find that this is the imposter Sarah, and the real Sarah is coming up from behind her. And we find that also that Linda, the actress that plays Sarah, actually legitimately has a twin sister. And so, luckily for her. So, as John is trying to figure out who is the real Sarah Connor, eventually John is to look at the feet and realize that all of a sudden the metal feet are connecting with the ground, and John is to be like, oh well, obviously this is the imposter here, shooter. So here's where Sarah goes onto this line of shots trying to take out the T-1000. Eventually he shrugs it all off and does the whole waving of the finger. Then all of a sudden the Terminator comes in with this gear he's coming in on slowly but surely with his grenade launcher to blast away the T-1000, to all of a sudden have the T-1000 have this little delay where he's like, huh? And then he's like, pa! And then he is to kind of burst into a number of different pieces that eventually have him fall into the molten stag, where eventually he's going on and he's eventually getting destroyed. And even during this time where the villain is getting killed off here, man, is it being done in a heavy amount of detail. So even in this pool, we come to find that the liquid metal Terminator is to be shifting and changing to everyone that he's become throughout this entire movie to give us a real, very cool looking visual by the end of this film of him morphing through all these people and then like desperately like clinging on, and trying to just figure out a way to survive. But eventually, the further and further they sink and they die. So after the success of the finally T-1000 getting killed here, John Connor goes on and is to try to pick up the Terminator, and Terminator goes on and says, I need a vacation. So after they look on, they realize like, okay, now it's time to get rid of the metal arm and the chip. And eventually, as they chuck those things also in the molten stag, the Terminator realizes that there's only one more chip left, and it's the chip within its own brain. So now, this is the point where the Terminator has to self-terminate or also just have someone else help him with that. So John doesn't want him to go, and they hug it out. And so the Terminator is like, well, now I know why you cry, but it's something I can never do. And so they hug it out. So, like a man does. Nobody cry. This isn't emotional. Come on. We're almost at the end here. Come on, let's go. So, so the Terminator goes on and finds that there's a bunch of chains that he can go on and kind of make his way down. And Sarah is to go on and hit this button, which is very similar to the button of the first movie, which kind of mans him down here. It's a very interesting visual here. So, as the Terminator is going into the molten, he eventually is to go on and further go down there, and it's all just like, and at one point by the very end, he goes on to just thumbs up, and then he disappears. So now we cut to Judgment Day supposedly never happening. Sarah Connor is to see John having a wife and kids and being at a playground, and so Sarah is to say that since Judgment Day had never happened, that every day is to be treated as a gift. And that if anything, as Sarah is now to be Grandma Sarah, and is to be trying to help her grandkid tie her shoes. So Sarah is to go on and talk about the value of human life, and hoping that in the future we can all value that too. And then we cut to end credit scene. Thank God, because whoo, I am so happy to get this done, get this uploaded. Hopefully it'll go on and do something. I don't think it's gonna do nearly as well as the other one that I'd gone on to do. Because I'd even look at like the Universal Soldier thing and be like, man, like that one wasn't doing as nearly as well as the other one did. But I don't care at this point. Like, I'm just doing these for the accomplishment of getting them done. Plus, also, I'm just so happy to, like, when I'm choosing to get into these films, I'm having a bit of fun with them. So, honestly, whatever happens is whatever happens. Like, I'm just at this point to, yeah, there's times where I'm kind of frustrated, but I'm also just like, well, it's clearly because, like, I'm not making the best choices. So I'm making a bit of mistakes, but I'm learning as I go. So, still that I'm to be like, man, like I can't go on and do what's best for the channel. I feel like I have to keep selfishly trying to keep going on and doing what's best for me. And doing a project like this will be best for the channel and be very impactful. But either way, I'm going to go on and try to get the heck out of here so I can upload this, as well as also upload some other projects that were past projects, because I'm going to be going on and hopefully putting another video together for another day, because I'm going to try to give myself breaks, because otherwise I'm just going to drive myself crazy. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye. Thank you everyone for watching any of these videos lately. I've been really seeing the quick amount of progress that I've been gaining lately, but that's all good and great and all, but I just have to keep on making that kind of progress. I have to figure out ways to make the best possible future projects in this channel. And it's really, I'm really at a good spot right now because I feel like I can make better choices now, because I feel like I have more freedom now. Like I feel that like there's projects that I think will be better for the channel that people want, and I haven't gotten to those yet. I feel kind of guilty, and I feel just kind of, ugh, like, why am I not getting to these? But I hope to get to them in the future. So, that said, bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.